Hello, this is Bobby Newman. I'd like to welcome you to this week's Research Minutes, the CPRE Knowledge Hub's weekly podcast where we interview researchers about the latest work being done in the field to help improve education. This week I speak with Dr. James Kim, Associate Professor at Harvard University Graduate School of Education, about his experimental study engaging struggling adolescent readers to improve reading skills, which was published last fall in the Reading Research Quarterly. Jimmy, thank you for joining me today.
It's great to be here with you.
Can you tell me a little bit about how your study came to be?
Sure. I want to begin by making some acknowledgments. We are a project that was funded by the Institute of Education Sciences Reading for Understanding grant. We're one of 5 projects, and the project PIs are Suzanne Donovan at the Strategic Education Research Partnership, and Catherine Snow at Harvard University, and Lowry Hemphill at Wheelock College. Lowry Hemphill is the developer of the StARI intervention, and as part of our Reading for Understanding grant, we were given the task of developing a Tier 2 intervention for middle school students who were struggling and 2 to 4 grade levels behind. And so that's a little bit about the genesis behind StARI.
The reading program is StARI, Strategic Adolescent Reading Intervention, is aimed at grades 6 through 8?
That's correct.
And what's the theoretical framework of the program?
Well, we started with a very simple framework around reading engagement. And so when we developed StARI, our basic goal was to improve students' skill and will to read. When you're a struggling adolescent reader, you're likely to have a lot of challenges with, say, decoding, vocabulary, understanding morphology, fluency, comprehension, and also motivation. So going into this project, our goal was to develop an intervention that would engage students who've been struggling for several years. So what we try to do in the program is really 3 things. There are 3 ways that StARI engages students. One is we use engaging in accessible texts. So the idea here is use texts about topics that are relevant and important to kids, things like the Iraq War, the 9/11 attacks, and use these texts because they connect to students, they're relevant and important for adolescents, and make sure that the texts are accessible so that the kids can read the words, they can read fluently, they can build their self-efficacy and their motivation. The second thing that we do in StARI to build students' reading engagement is we emphasize peer collaboration and student voice. If you've ever been inside a middle school classroom, you know that one thing that's important for kids at this age is opportunities to interact with their peers. And so StARI builds kids' social motivation to read by pairing students up to work on fluency and comprehension tasks. We have regular debates and discussions about text so that kids can take different perspectives, they can build their listening skills, they can respond to these complex texts. And so there's this very strong emphasis on peer collaboration and voice. The third novel feature of StARI is that we embed basic reading skills instruction in cognitively challenging texts. So while kids are working on their decoding and their fluency, their morphological awareness skills, they're also reading about relevant current events as the ones I talked about earlier, say the Iraq War. And so they have this sense that they're really engaging in topics that are important, that are relevant for them, but they're simultaneously building their reading skills. So all of these 3 components work together: reading, engaging, accessible text, peer collaboration and voice, the integration of basic skills and complex texts to support students' engagement. So if there's one word that I would use to describe the program, it's engagement. The goal is to really engage kids in these literacy activities.
And so the very important question is, how did the reading engagement affect their reading growth?
Well, reading engagement is hard to measure because it means different things to different people. And so what we did is we put our foot down and we said, okay, we're going to measure students' behavioral engagement, and then we're going to see if improving students' behavioral engagement improves their reading skills. So you must be wondering, well, how did you measure students' behavioral engagement? What we did is we basically theorized that kids have to be actively involved in the activities that are a part of StARI to enjoy reading gains at the end of the school year. And so Lowry Hemphill developed the intervention, and as part of the intervention, we created workbooks for students. So every student who's in the program receives a StARI workbook, and the StARI workbook has daily activities around the specific components of the program. So there might be fluency work, talking to your neighbor about a passage that was read, responding to text that the teacher has just discussed. And so there are over 300 pages in this StARI workbook, and every day the kids are completing different activities. Now, if I asked you, do you think all the students completed all 318 pages of the workbook? The answer, of course, is no. There's lots of reasons why kids don't, fully complete the activities. Teachers' pacing varies. Students' level of engagement varies. They might not be actively involved in the activities one day versus another day. So there's quite a lot of variation in this measure of behavioral engagement. So what we did is we took each of the workbooks and we coded the percentage of the workbook that the child completed. The more important question to address what you asked me earlier about, well, does engagement lead to better outcomes? The answer is yes, because what we did is we simply said, do kids who complete more of the workbook enjoy larger reading gains at the end of the school year than kids who complete less of the workbook? The answer is yes. We think this is really good news for a couple of reasons. One is that it's very hard for teachers to directly improve students' reading scores. If teachers could do that, then everyone would have a solution to one of the most pressing challenges that schools are facing. Instead, what we said is teachers can more easily control the level of engagement by providing high-quality instruction and using StARI materials that engage students. And it's this improvement in engagement that is a lever of change that ultimately improves students' outcome. And we think that's good news because a lot of adolescent literacy interventions have many moving parts. There are multiple components, and it's often a black box. We don't know which of those levers lead to improvements in outcomes. In our study, we had this theory of how we could engage kids, and then we had a measure of students' behavioral engagement, and it turns out that improving behavioral engagement was a key lever of change that ultimately led to improvements in students' reading outcomes.
Were the teachers' ratings of the students' engagement predictive of their reading growth?
That's a great question. So for the StARI students, we asked the teachers to rate the students' engagement using a measure called the Reading Engagement Index. This is a measure that was developed by John Guthrie and Alan Wickfield at the University of Maryland, and it's a measure they've used for another intervention called concept-oriented reading instruction that also emphasizes students' reading engagement. And what we did is we asked the teachers to rate each of their students on things like their inclination to work hard in reading, how confident a reader the student was, whether they used comprehension strategies, and their ability to focus during reading. We had this measure only for the StARI students, and so we're only able to talk about whether this engagement measure explains additional variation in reading scores at the end of the school year above and beyond things like their initial reading skills, the school that they were in. The answer to this question, do teacher ratings help explain students' reading outcomes at the end of the school year for StARI students, is yes. Even after we accounted for students' initial reading levels as well as the schools that they attended. And we think that's good news because another thing that's important is not only are the students engaging more in the program as measured by the workbooks, but the teachers also appear to see that themselves as they work with the kids. So we have these two sources of data that suggests that there were real improvements in StARI students' reading engagement during the course of the study.
So what advice would you give to teachers or other practitioners who are working with students who lack literacy or are struggling like the students in the study were?
I think one of the things that I would say is that we're moving from an era of accountability to an era of engagement. All of us who have been in education know that under the No Child Left Behind Act, there was a very strong emphasis on test-based accountability, really focusing on how we can improve student outcomes and holding schools and teachers accountable for doing that. Under the Every Student Succeeds Act, I think there's much more freedom and leeway that's given to states and districts to develop accountability systems and measures of student learning. And I think with these important changes in national policy, the advice that I would give schools is to think more carefully about the kinds of literacy activities that engage students and less about ways to improve their test scores.
That's terrific. And in the future, we should look for the study being reviewed by the Works Clearinghouse?
Yes, this study will be hopefully reviewed by the Works Clearinghouse this year. I hope that many practitioners and policymakers can access the review or the Reading Research Quarterly article to learn about the program, its theory, as well as its results.
Thank you, Dr. Kim. It was a pleasure and a very engaging conversation.
It was my pleasure being with you, and I thank you for the opportunity to be a part of this podcast.
Thanks. Thank you for listening to Research Minutes. To share your thoughts on this discussion, head to khub Conversations at cprehub.org. To subscribe to our weekly podcast and listen to more interviews, head to soundcloud.com/CPRE Knowledge Hub. And for the latest videos, podcasts, and discussion updates, follow us at CPRE Hub on Twitter and CPRE Knowledge Hub on Facebook. We look forward to hearing from you.